On here. There's another one called the sea rod. It's pretty dead. It's lost most of its coloration, but they can be pretty tall. Like some are the ones that are around this taller than me, just about 2.8 meters, about 5'10" or thereabouts. So just a very flexible skeleton, which is completely different than the very rigid skeletons of these corals here. How are we doing, Jamie?
I think we're on.
Okay, I'll pass
So hopefully Ricardo will come back to those, and we'll keep those up there. But if you can find the second stream, hopefully what we can do is we can just come along here and point to. So we're going to stop this broadcast because it's going to be very difficult to have two streams going at one go. And in the chat here, somebody will put the URL of the new broadcast, I hope.
Can they hear you now? You want to have a look at that coral?
Yeah.
So, are we talking to them?
Yeah, so
okay.
we're talking.
So we are looking at, and I hope you can see and hear what we have to say, we're looking at something we call the Deadman Fingers coral, he said in his worst pirate voice. Because it's a very bland-looking coral, as opposed to most corals which are green or brown and very vibrant. This is very pale-looking. It's still got its zooxanthellae in it. It just has to be a brownish color. And it's a branch coral. It doesn't look like it, but it's got very short and very stubby branches that give it this appearance. So if it was to keep growing, it would just sort of turn into a big, broad lump. There's a second colony over here, and it may have been a result of a piece of this breaking off and getting washed over here and then growing up by itself. Parietes, not a common coral found offshore. It likes protected waters. That's why it's here by the dock.
Okay.
Often find it in seagrass beds in our lagoon system. We have another interesting coral over here. Want to have a look at that one, Jamie?
Yeah.
The fire coral.
Great. Yeah, watching where to put feet and everything else.
Yeah, no, you're doing pretty good. So over here is the fire coral, and it doesn't look very similar to the other ones because you really can't see the polyps in this one. It's minute. They're kind of in a slightly different taxonomic group. But these fire corals are sort of our canary in the coal mine. It's the first coral that actually bleaches in Bermuda, and it will bleach here at this dock, and I'm pretty sure this coral was bleached when I saw it this summer in August.
So the little white tips are...
Well, it's white tips because that's actually where the coral is growing so quickly. The algae haven't actually colonized that part of the tissue yet, so that's a distinctive feature. But it's called the fire coral because they got some really nasty stinging cells, and you don't forget bumping into that one by mistake.
Okay, that's not a true coral, but
It's called a hydrozoan coral. So
okay.
It's very similar in terms of how it builds a skeleton, has those zooxanthellae. No other hydrozoans look like that. So it's an example we call convergent evolution. That it's had a similar success as an animal, growing as a colony, growing on a reef. It just came from a different branch of the universe of coral-like animals. And we have another coral-like animal over there. We have a large giant sea anemone over there. They're kind of cool sometimes. They often have little shrimps living in there that take advantage of the
we don't hear properly. Hopefully you can hear us now. It's probably when the microphone goes underwater.
Okay, so I have to explain all that again.
Is that better? Can someone tell us whether the sound's better there? Hopefully you can see. I will.
So we were looking at the fire coral over here, very yellow because it's very brightly colored because of the zooxanthellae, and it has a nasty sting. It's always the coral that bleaches first in the summer. I'm pretty sure when I saw that coral in August or early September, it was bone white, but it didn't die, and so it just showed the capacity to recover. And then we looked over here at the giant sea anemone, just to its left, very, very big animal. Also not some very good stinging cells. It's after plankton for its food. What's unusual for these anemones, not that unusual, but it's always interesting, if you look at it very closely, you can also find quite a few very small colorless shrimp in there, Periclimnes. And they're in there trying to pick up bits and pieces of material, but basically using the anemone as a safe home, just like Nemo does with his anemones in the Pacific.
And that one's got stinging cells. I mean, coral has stinging cells as well.
Yeah.
But some of them are sort of ticklish or sticky, and some of them go.
That's right.
Full power.
Some are nasty, and some are pretty benign, and some barely use them. That one we looked at the beginning, Parietes doesn't really ever use its tentacles. It mostly relies on its symbionts.
Okay.
They can, but they don't have any sting to them at all.
Is it? I mean, this which we're just this very bright red.
Oh, looking at another not very friendly organism. We can looking at a very orange, what we call a fire sponge, Tadania ignis, and it's fire, and that's what the last word ignis means, fire. It doesn't have stinging cells, but all sponges have some sort of internal structure. I showed you one earlier, which has a very soft structure, but these ones have very small spines in them, and those spines, when they get into your skin, just cause a huge inflammation response. It really hurts. And the spines don't break down. You really have to pull them out. Your body will eventually reject them, but boy does it hurt. So you really want to leave those fire sponges alone.
Okay.
It's a common sponge in our protected waters. It's not very common on our offshore reefs. There are other sponges that are more abundant out there.
I think we had some chicken liver sponges down
Chicken liver sponges, they look exactly what
like
they sound like. They're not particularly delicious at all. But all sponges, whether they have those spines or the chicken liver doesn't have those spines, but they also have what we call a chemical defense. This chicken liver is not eaten by very much. The only animals that can really eat sponges are angelfish and hawksbill turtles. After that, nobody else wants to eat a sponge. They're either got spines in them that the turtle and the angelfish can get past because they have very, very tough mouths that allow the spines to be crushed up before they go in the digestive system. And they don't mind all the nasty chemicals that are found in the sponges. But most other sensible organisms just ignore the sponges with the effort to eat.
What else is of?
Well, what's quite remarkable here is the amount of plant life. I'm going to show you an algae. Let me just shake off some of the mud. This is called a merman's shaving brush. I never use them because I got a beard. But this is what we call a calcareous algae. And it's a plant.
Yeah, if I can.
And it just roots to the bottom. And it grows, and quite a few little animals will live inside these branches. You're not going to be able to see them right now. They're just a type of habitat. There's another one I'll show you here. Right next to it, this is another calcareous algae called Halimeda.
Great.
So Halimeda is really an important contributor to the sediments and very common on reefs. It makes a big part of the reef sediments. Not this particular species, but these are called calcareous algae because they do exactly what corals do. They take elements out of the water, calcium and carbonate, and fix them into a skeleton. This is a kind of a flexible skeleton, as is this one, but they're basically taking up a lot of material out of the water to build a structure for themselves. Other plants don't have that feature. I'll show you. Picked up another algae, which is also calcareous. We have some soft red algae here that doesn't have any calcium carbonate, but there is some that do. So one thing I just pointing out is we talked a little bit about algae being a challenge for coral reefs, and there's an awful lot of algae growing on these rocks. Now this isn't pretending to be a coral reef, but it's the growth of algae such as this which can become a real blanket on a coral reef. That make sense, Jamie?
And some very large anemones under the gaffy here.
Oh, well, I'm going to put it back up and see those when we were here earlier. Are they like the other anemone we saw over there?
Yeah.
Okay.
People are.
Well, the only thing that we're doing here, Jamie, is we're disturbing all the fish, so we don't get a chance to see much of the fish life. Like us moving around too much.
So I've got, if you can see the screen at all.
Not really. Well, I think it's just, let me get my mask and I can see what you're seeing. So those are the same anemone that we just saw, the giant sea anemone, Condylactus gigantea.
And so the fish species are pretty well.
We have lots of different fishes in here, and you've been here for a few days. I mean, if you're not in the water, you can go move around. We have a lot of big fish we saw just over here. I don't know if your camera picked those up. I'll talk a little bit about them when I was talking about the plastic story.
Yeah.
We've had grunts on the bottom, snappers come in here. This morning we saw jacks that were coming in to chase these bait fishes. One of those bait fishes here is an endemic species. That means that the fish is only found in Bermuda. And I told you the story earlier about the fact that Bermuda doesn't have much diversity compared to the Caribbean, and that's generally true. And it's also true for the fact that we don't have that many endemic fishes that we've recognized. We've only got maybe 5 other endemic fishes that we see here. That means that as these animals have been isolated in Bermuda, their genetics have changed over time to make them distinctive in terms of their body and their genome. We don't know much about these fishes. I have a current project trying to study it right now. Because if it's endemic, it means you've got to be responsible for it. You've got to be responsible to make sure that you create the conditions that favor that animal's success over time. And for us, is learn more about this Bermuda anchovy to make sure that it's going to be available to us as a food and bait fish for a long time to come.
It's a very dirty camera. But just to end off, people have been asking about what's the most endangered fish, or should we be thinking about, we hear a lot about when we look at sort of land-based conservation, we talk about this is the most endangered, there's only 3 of these left, we should be looking after this one. Is that the same with sort of reef here in Bermuda or with marine conservation more generally?
I think you can look at the most vulnerable species, the ones that we use a lot. So in many parts of the world, the large groupers are the ones that are heavily fished, and so we're greatly concerned that we're going to lose those groupers. We have maybe 2 groupers that we can harvest here, and we have another 6 species that are all protected. So we can't harvest them because we had already overfished them or worried they might disappear. Now, none of those species are endemic, so they exist in parts of the Caribbean. But at a collective level, we try to manage the overall harvesting of those fishes to make sure we don't drive them into extinction. I think some of the things that are kind of analogous to rainforests. We don't know everything that's in our waters, so the most vulnerable things are probably the ones we don't know about yet because we haven't actually studied them. There may be things living on this rock. It might be a worm. It might be a small crustacean like a tiny shrimp that no one's really studied before, and then we're going to change something and we'll lose them before we even measure them. And that's exactly what we know for rainforests. The more we look in rainforests, we keep finding diversity of life up in the tree canopy, but we've already cut the forest down, and all the species disappear before we really could have cataloged them and measured them. So the ignorance that we have about the complete diversity sets us up for losing things before we know we actually even had them at some point. Other things are, at least in Bermuda, are pretty stable because we have a pretty good history of conservation. We've recognized that we're a rock in the middle of the ocean and we got to take care of our resources, and we've done a really good job for the last 200 years in improving how we extract resources, improving our decisions. This camera is pointing to a development number over here. Everything we do in Bermuda...
Well, it's pointing at us now.
Oh, it's pointing at us. Well, you saw a big number over there. Now, we really regulate what humans do in Bermuda because if we screw something up, we've lost it. And so we have to be really careful about that. Other jurisdictions aren't nearly as progressive or active in trying to protect what they want. But the big things go quickly, and so we've lost a lot of sharks around Bermuda that used to be very abundant. They're still out there, but they're diminished, and we have to worry about some of the big animals.
Brilliant. I think we're reaching the end of our time, very sadly.
Just got started.
But is there anything, sort of a message that you'd like to send out to people? I think one of the things is people feel if they're not near a coral reef, how can coral be part of their lives, and how can they be part of the coral future?
Well, we're all connected to the ocean. Doesn't matter whether you're living in Central Europe or Central United States of America or Central Canada or in the middle of Brazil. Our oceans are really important for our lives. So when you think about the things you use, or you think about the products you buy, and knowing that they've come from a place where those resources are managed. If you want to buy a piece of tuna, if you want to buy a handbag made from an animal skin, know those sources so that you're not contributing to the demise of a particular habitat or particular species. It's all we have that responsibility to do, not just make the assumption, oh, it looks pretty or it tastes good, and there's no
no consequence for having consumed or bought or used that thing. So just being aware of what's going on, knowing that reefs exist, finding hopefully a chance in your life to go and visit a reef and jump in and enjoy it. My goal is to try to educate people so that the next generation of young people on this planet will grow up to enjoy a great reef rather than looking at pictures taken in the year 2000 before they all disappeared in the 21st century. So, pay attention to where things come from. If you have a voice, use it. If you can write, support good causes, good non-governmental organizations that are working toward conservation. It can be very helpful. You can stretch a dollar a long way when they're all put together and applied in the right way to get governments and peoples to change things and change things for the better. It doesn't mean people have to give up everything they love about reefs. It means just being more responsible, more sensible about how we use our resources and dispose of our waste like plastic.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Right,
well,
Jamie.
thank you very, very much. Goodbye,
everybody.
From Trunk
Hope you
Island.
enjoyed that today.
Brilliant. Thank you. I will now got to find a way of just